Hello, my name is Mackenzie Jem. I am in the master's program of special education at University of Hartford, and this presentation is for EDH 501. For this presentation, I chose to discuss behavior intervention. Before getting into behavior intervention strategies and services, it's important to take a look at the background into why students may be having these problem behaviors when they come to school. The first is looking at behavior disorder. And there are students who have been determined to have behavior disorders. These can range from small reactions to large reactions with different triggers that can cause being in a classroom to be very difficult due to having a certain disorder. The second would be learning disabilities. Many times, students with certain learning disabilities will tend to have more problematic behavior when they are working on something that they truly have a hard time and really do struggle with. For example, if there is a student who struggles with reading, the student may have problem behaviors when it's time to do reading or when it's time to have English language arts class. It may be able to cause teachers to be able to track that behavior and see that a student, every time they have to come to reading class, they are starting to have behaviors and act out. And you can narrow it down to they just get frustrated because they truly do have a disability in a certain subject or in a certain area that they have to work on. The next would be learning about students' family life. Many students come into school and have had a whole morning before the school day has even started. And depending on where the student's family lives and who they live with and what happens, it can affect their entire day. We always hope that our students have very safe and secure home lives, but we have all come to find out that that is not always the truth. And family life can impact a student's day and cause them to have those problem behaviors because they just are trying to adapt to what's going on at home and who they have at home for them. And it can be very, very difficult no matter what the age of the student is. Another important background area to look at is stress. Even thinking about elementary age students, everybody experiences stressors that cause them to have pretty extreme problematic behaviors. No matter to us, it may be a small problem. To them, it might be a very, very big problem that is causing them a lot of stress. And sometimes students aren't even able to articulate to us what exactly the stressor is. It's just something that is affecting them so much and causing them to act out or causing them to have a certain problem behavior. Finally, it's important to look at the trauma that some kids have, whether it be current trauma or past trauma. Trauma can weigh very heavily on a child. And even when they start to get a little bit older, sometimes that trauma can develop into different things. But a lot of times, if a student has a trauma background, this will contribute to their problem behaviors. And when you are able to narrow down what that trauma is, maybe the triggers that happen in school, sometimes you can track the problem behaviors that do stem from trauma and a student having a trauma background. The next thing that we're going to look at is behavior interventions. These are the steps that teachers take to solve problem behaviors at school. Some examples of problem behaviors can be calling out or disrupting class, being aggressive towards classmates or teachers, work refusal, inappropriate language or actions. Obviously, there are so many examples of problem behaviors. It's not limited to just those. Typically, if it is a child that is disrupting other students' learning or even their own learning due to problem behaviors, schools will typically implement some form of behavior intervention because it is important that if a student is not allowing other students to learn due to disrupting a class or being aggressive towards someone else, that will cause them to need some type of intervention so that the student themselves can be successful and so that the other students around them are not going to be affected by this. The first area we're going to take a look at is called the multi-tiered system of support, which is also referred to MTSS. In the article PBS Reward, it talks about how this is a proactive approach to identifying students with academic or behavioral needs. It's important to know that early assessment and intervention for these students can help them catch up with their peers sooner. So that is why people enjoy MTSS, because it's a chance to get those students' needs taken care of so that they have a chance to be able to participate with their peers in the future in regular classroom settings. The key components of MTSS include universal screening of all students early in the school year. There are tiers of interventions that can be amplified in response to levels of need. There's an ongoing data collection and continual assessment of the student. It's a school-wide approach to expectations and supports. And MTSS also has parent involvement so that not only the school is aware of what's going on with the child, but that there is parent involvement and they are aware. And it's important to know that it's a whole child learning experience that includes academic, social, emotional, and behavioral. Additionally, looking at the positive behavior interventions and supports, which is also known as PBIS, these are proactive behavioral supports that schools can put in place to support all students. And that is from an article by King in 2019. And taking a look at this image, you can see that there are 3 tiers. And we'll start by looking at tier 1, which is 80%. So it's most students, and it includes a school-wide interventions for all learners to prevent behavior challenges. And this can be done by active supervision and engagement, social skills instruction, acknowledgement systems, and behavior expectations. And an example of this can be a teacher at the beginning of the day, making sure that the expectations for her classroom are set and that the student is aware of what is expected of he or she for the morning work, for the next section of their day, and so on, so that the student knows what is being expected of them. The next tier is about 15%, and it's specialized interventions for learners who are at risk for academic or social failure due to those behavior challenges. Some examples of how this is handled would be a check-in, check-out, social skills groups, small group counseling, restorative justice circles, and conflict resolution. An example of check-in, check-out is one that I'm very familiar with. Working as a para, I currently do a check-in, check-out with 2 different students in a 6th grade classroom. I meet these students at the beginning of the morning when they get off the bus. We take about a 2-minute walk through the school, just going through the hallways. If it's a nice day out, we'll walk outside. And this way I can ask them a couple questions and really do a check-in with them, ask them how their morning was, ask them what they had for breakfast. It's a way for me to gauge their mood before they enter the classroom, to know that if they are ready for the day, or maybe they will need some extra time to get ready for the day. The last tier to take a look at is tier 3, individualized interventions for students with intensive and chronic behavior challenges. And this is about 5%. And how we can look at this 5% is using individual therapy, functional behavior assessments, which is also known as FBA, behavior intervention plans, also known as BIPs, wraparound support, and crisis response. Most commonly, we are familiar with behavior intervention plans, and I will go on to be discussing these next in the presentation. So as stated before, behavior intervention plan is a plan that teaches and rewards good behavior, and it replaces the inappropriate behavior with appropriate behavior. The purpose is to prevent or stop misbehavior, not just punish the child. And that is a quote from Morin in 2021. A functional behavior assessment can help teachers and staff find the cause of the behavior. And it's important to know that in this situation, intervention refers to strategies or supports. Educators refer to strategies and supports as interventions because it means that they're formal and they are done for a specific amount of times. It's also important to know that with a behavior intervention plan, once it is set, that does not mean that that is the plan for the rest of the student's educational career. Plans should always be adjusted when needed. It is not meant to be the same forever. Sometimes a plan is created and it simply just doesn't work for the student. That would be an example of a time where a plan needs to be changed quickly. Other times, a plan can be changed because the student is responding well to what has been set up for them, and they can change the plan in terms of helping it develop and maybe add some new appropriate behaviors in to keep the student working and learning on those inappropriate behaviors and what is appropriate to replace that behavior with. I thought it was important to include an example of a BIP, and in the next 2 slides, I'm going to be reviewing an example. But first, I wanted to read a quote from Regis. Effective behavior intervention plans can effectively minimize negative behaviors and ensure a healthy educational environment that optimizes learning and can improve family interactions. And I really like that quote because it shows just how important a behavior plan can be. It seems extreme sometimes, but a behavior intervention plan really can help a student to grow and just adjust their behaviors to have even just a single behavior can change, and it can affect how their whole day goes. And it really benefits the students learning in school and how their family interacts when they're at home. So taking a look at the behavior intervention plan, the first box is a description of the targeted behavior. This is typically a smaller section. We know that the behavior is identified. In this case, it's a student out of their seat for more than 5 seconds without permission from a teacher. Examples are given and non-examples are given, which helps us know when that behavior is considered. So rolling around and running around is an example where emergency bathrooms, if a student were to run out and go to the bathroom, or if they were to be sick, that is not an example of that behavior. The next part would be, some call it the hypothesis. This is just a general idea of when we're seeing this behavior happen and why we think that this behavior is happening. So to give an overview in this paragraph, it's simply talking about how if the student is not receiving one-on-one attention, this is when they're noticing the behaviors happening, such as doing tricks on the carpet, rolling around on the floor. And typically the staff member responds by redirecting the student or by teaching the student a replacement behavior. And it's being said that through the behavior, the student is trying to say, I want my teacher's attention. And that by the teacher giving this response, it can almost be reinforcing that behavior because the teacher is acknowledging the student. The third box would be what can be done to prevent the occurrence of the fast triggers. So this is what the teacher can be doing, any other staff member, no matter who's involved. These are the steps that can be taken, and it's important to describe them in enough detail. So if another staff member had to do this, they would know what to do with the student. A couple examples of what has been done to prevent the fast triggers would be the classroom teacher doing a check-in with the student, and the check-in would be in the form of a several-minute walk and talk. Another would be to establish a self-monitoring procedure for the student to monitor his waiting behavior. And the last one would be remove some of the physical structures in the classroom on which the student climbs. The next box would be replacement behaviors. And this is important and needs to be always included in a behavior intervention plan, because this is what is the new behavior that's going to be taught to replace the behavior that is trying to be gotten rid of from the student, what they're doing right now. How are we going to replace that behavior with something different? And how is that behavior going to be taught to the student? So here it talks about how the student's going to wait for the teacher's attention, and data is going to be taken to see how long the student can work independently without asking for the teacher's attention. This will establish a baseline, and once they can do that, the student will be taught to gradually build upon the amount of time by doing the following, which is refer to a folder of appropriate weighting activities, such as a brief, easy to complete academic task, word finds, drawing activities. And I won't read through the other two just for the sake of the example, but you can see that this is where we are figuring out how we're going to help the student build on achieving those new behaviors once we establish a baseline. The next box would be strategies for reinforcing replacement behavior. What is the immediate benefit to the student, and how is the student rewarded for engaging in this new behavior? So the first bullet says the student will be reinforced for waiting for the expected amount of time. It is recommended that the student wait time be increased on an average of every 2 to 3 minutes every few days, assuming that the student has mastered the previous expected wait time. The student will be reinforced for waiting by the paraprofessional. The paraprofessional will reinforce the student with positive praise and individualized attention. The paraprofessional should give very specific praise that lasts for a previously determined amount of time, such as 30 seconds. It is important that the praise be consistently administered over time. To increase the consistency of praise, the paraprofessional may have a menu of praise statements that she pulls from when reinforcing the student. The next box would be strategies for reducing the targeted behavior. What will be the response should the target behavior occur? This response should not maintain the behavior. So an example of this would be the planned ignoring should be used when the safety of the student and his peers is not a concern. And when planned ignoring is not decreasing the student's behavior, the team may consider warning the student that continuing to engage in the behavior will result in a loss of tangibles, or the team may inform the student that if he stops engaging in the behavior, sits down and begins engaging in an appropriate behavior for a designated amount of time, he will have the opportunity to earn a reinforcer. The third to last box is the crisis plan. Should the strategies for reducing the target behavior not be effective, or if the target behavior occurs in a manner that jeopardizes safety of other students, this is how others should respond. The team should continue implementing the previously established crisis plan, which would be remove the students from the classroom or remove the teacher from the classroom. The second to last box would be the data collection and monitoring of the target and replacement behaviors. What type of data will be collected, when, and by whom? And how often will the data be monitored and by whom? And how often will updates be made to the behavior intervention plan? The baseline data on the student's waiting time is going to be collected by the paraprofessional. After a baseline is established and the intervention is implemented, the paraprofessional and the student should monitor the waiting time at each previously established interval. Data should be reviewed daily, and changes to the plan may need to be made daily if the data suggests changes are needed. The next box is the staff training and monitoring. So who is responsible for training others to implement this BIP? What is the process for training? How often should staff be observed to make sure that they are implementing this plan how it is currently written? The lead teacher will train the teacher and the paraprofessional on how to teach the student to do these replacement behaviors, how to establish the self-monitoring procedure, and how to reinforce the replacement behavior consistently. The team should consult on the plan daily to determine its effectiveness and to discuss any changes that should be made. So it's important to know that, and I like these last two boxes because it is important to know that if a student has a behavior plan and they are a student whose behaviors can be very extreme, and where if something goes wrong, others need to leave the room, typically their behavior plan will be looked at more frequently to make sure that the changes that are being made and the data that's being collected is showing that this plan is working for the student. If not, it definitely is crucial that the plan be adjusted to what the data is reflecting. Another area to look at, and sometimes gets a lot of questions about, is a 504 and an IEP. If students already have a 504 or an IEP plan, their 504 or IEP team will make the decision if a BIP is needed. Students do not have to have a 504 or an IEP to get a behavior plan. Like I mentioned before, if a student is acting out in school and it's affecting their learning as well as the students around them, their learning as well, the school will make the decision on when it's necessary to establish a BIP. Behavior intervention services are group services when the child's goals relate to benefiting from group intervention. This is an additional area from Morin. She discusses how group services can be helpful with students learning from each other if their goals are similar to others in the group. Another typical service is individual services. This may be meeting with a behavior coach, a school psychologist, a school counselor. These individual services target what the student's needs are directly and are able to be addressed when needed. Paraprofessionals are the next important service that many students receive, such as in the behavior intervention plan we just read about. This student was assigned a paraprofessional, and that paraprofessional was responsible for collecting data, reinforcing the behavior, and just they're constantly with that student. So they are able to really see how the behaviors are starting and stopping, and they are in control of recording all of that data so that the case manager can see what's going on, the special education teacher can see what's going on. So typically these students who do need that extra assistance will have a one-on-one paraprofessional. The next would be an applied behavior analysis, commonly seen as ABA. This is a scientific approach to understanding behavior. ABA refers to a set of principles that focus on how behaviors change or are affected by the environment, as well as how long learning takes place. The next would be behavior intervention teachers who provide behavior support and intervention services to individual schools. This was discussed by an article by Regis College. Every school that I have been to have a behavior intervention teacher who are available for taking students for breaks, for having individual services with them, whether it be a break or a meeting. These teachers are readily available for those students who have problem behaviors, and they are a really key part in setting these students up for success. The next would be positive behavior intervention strategies, and some examples are designing routines. When you're able to provide students with more time to spend on learning by reducing the time required to transition from one task to another, that is a really good example of designing a routine that's going to work for a student who may have problem behaviors. Additional routines can be passing out materials. It can be making up for missed work when that is going to take place, establishing arrival and dismissal procedures, basically just any situation where a student can know the exact routine of how something is going to happen to eliminate the element of surprise. That will help these students to be more successful. For example, I work with a student who, if there's a change in their daily schedule, that can really throw them off and cause some of those unwanted behaviors to start. For example, if something happens and the student is unprepared for it, typically they will elope. And this will go on for about 15 minutes before the student can settle. So what I like to do is establish a routine. And if there's going to be a break in that routine, I introduce that at least 24 hours in advance and then continue to go over it with that student so that they typically will know it's coming and they can prepare for it. Therefore, like I said before, it eliminates that element of surprise that can really tip some students off. Additionally, using silent signals can be a really great way to provide services for some students. It can discourage problem behaviors in the classroom, and the teachers can establish a working relationship with the student and not have to verbally call out negative behavior. Silent signals are really quick and easy and can just really be helpful when the teacher has a bunch of other kids that they need to work with, but they are still able to have that connection with that one student. You see a lot of silent signals with classroom teachers. Some of these teachers take the time to meet with the students to have the student pick the signal that is going to be needed. This way, they can set a cue for the student to use when they want to participate, and they can use many positive and encouraging signals as negative ones. So a lot of times teachers want to make sure that you are using silent signals when it is something that is negative, but also that you're doing it for positive things as well. Something that I've noticed by working in upper elementary is that students are very aware of what's going on in the classroom. So being a paraprofessional that works mainly in the classroom with my student, I try my very best to use silent signals when the student is doing or having a problem behavior that is pretty low key and I know is not going to continue to grow. A lot of times we have looks, I have hand movements that I do with the student. And when they are able to respond to that and kind of handle the behavior on their own, I follow up with a positive silent signal, because it's important to know that if you are saying something out loud to the student, where if a student is getting up out of their chair and you verbally tell that student to stop or to sit down or to stop doing that, the students around them are going to pick up on that. And if all they're hearing is negative talk to the student, it creates a bad look on that student. So being able to handle certain situations with silent signals, if it is negative, it is really helpful. But then it is also really great when you can have some positive silent signals as well. An additional strategy would be assigning tasks. This can be types of lessons and looking at like I said before, if the student is passing out paperwork, they are always going to be the person who passes out papers during math. This is something that they can keep track of themselves. It is something that, in a time where passing out papers may result in some bad behaviors because there is a lull while kids are waiting for the papers to come out. If the student is the one passing out the papers, they have a job to do and they know that this is on them and they are ready to go when the time comes. Additionally, what teachers can do is help the students to be successful by shortening lessons for the student. Additionally, changing the number of tasks. For example, if a whole class is given 10 problems, maybe the teacher or para can just let the student do 5 problems. That way they're not overwhelmed and they at least are going to be getting some of the work done, but you don't have to worry about the student getting all 10 of those problems done if it's going to cause problem behaviors. For example, another way would be dividing difficult assignments into multiple parts. So if there's a writing assignment, for example, and students are required to write a 5-paragraph essay, helping the student break down that 5-paragraph essay and having them write the introduction on one day, the first body paragraph on the next day, the second body paragraph on the next day until they get to the conclusion. This way, there isn't a whole 5-paragraph paper hanging over their head and causing a lot of stress, which will lead to those problem behaviors. If they know that their task for the day is to just finish the introduction, this will allow them to not get as stressed out over the assignment, know that what their task is, and they can check it off when they're done, and know that tomorrow will be body paragraph 1, and that they can kind of take it piece by piece, and it doesn't need to be a big problem area for them. Additionally, setting expectations. I mentioned this before, but the expectations must be appropriate for the grade level and the ability of the students. It's important that the expectations are also the expectations for the class. Those are typically always posted in a classroom where the students can see, but it's important to go over those expectations with the whole class. And if there are expectations set only for the student who's having these problem behaviors, the teacher should go over and take the time to restate those expectations with the student at least once in the morning and typically once in the afternoon. I've noticed that after lunch and recess, it's a good idea to restate the expectations so the student has a successful end to the day, because a lot of times recess, students will get a little crazy, a little out of control. It's unstructured time that once they get back into the classroom, it can be hard to come down from that. Therefore, restating those expectations, bringing the student back into a classroom mindset will avoid having any problem behaviors that could come from them being a little out of control at recess. They know that they need to bring it back down, and this is what's expected of them to make it through the rest of the day. The next piece to look at is at home. A lot of this discussion has been about school. So the strategies and techniques created at school should also be continued at home. Students need the consistency to help them be successful in adjusting and changing their behavior. A quote from Regis College is, "Disruptions in students' routine make it even more difficult to implement and maintain intervention plans." We see this a lot with students whose families are a little bit less engaged. For whatever reason that may be, we have learned in classes that sometimes families are not able to be as engaged as you hope they would. But those families that are responsive and engaged and dedicated to helping their child be successful, there is a more consistent growth in this child's behavior because what is being taught at school is being implemented at home. Therefore, the student has a consistent 24-hour expectation of them, that they're not just at school for 6 or 7 hours with one behavior expectation, and that when they go home, it's kind of maybe a free for all or just a little bit looser, and that expectation starts to slip away. It takes a little bit more the next morning to have the expectation come back and for the student to know what is expected of them, what behaviors are allowed, what behaviors are not allowed. So when parents are on board and are able to provide that little bit of support at home, it really makes all the difference for the students. So looking at next steps, what I've noticed in PowerPoint presentations is that you are handed a lot of information and not all the time are you going to know where to start. So a couple ideas would be to collect data in a variety of settings, depending on the student and the situation. There may not be enough data to accurately assess the student. So picking a couple different settings, such as the playground, the lunchroom, during different classes, the passing time in the hallway. These are all different areas where someone can collect data on a student. Additionally, you can analyze the data and look for patterns. Patterns, for example, can be if you're noticing problem behaviors happening during lunch. And every single day there's a problem at lunch. This is information that is crucial in helping this student because there's obviously a trigger at lunch and it can be helpful in figuring out what needs to be done and what needs to be changed in the lunch routine. Like I had just said, this will allow you to identify the environment where behaviors occur. A lot of times it's not always happening in the same place for every student. Sometimes it happens a lot during unstructured time, but it also happens in the middle of math class or in the middle of social studies. And these are the things that are important to use the data to look for and identify where are these behaviors occurring. The next would be, what is the student gaining from the behavior? There's always a reason for the student having some problem behaviors. And It's important to take a look at, are they getting attention? Are they doing it for work avoidance? What is the student gaining from having this behavior? The next would be just deciding where to start. If you have a team that you work closely with, maybe it's already an IEP team set up, have a meeting and decide where to start, what each person is going to do, and how are we going to tackle the problem all together. It's important not to try to do it on your own, but to really use the team and resources that you have. And the last good idea would be to create goal statements. This is a little bit more after the fact, once the data has been collected and analyzed, and you know what the targeted behaviors are. Creating goal statements can be done with a student. If they can be present for it, or they can be done with the teacher. And sometimes it can be done with both of them. You can sit down and form these goal statements. And it's great because everyone is now going to be on the same page and totally understanding the expectations and the goals and how the plan is going to work for them. Here are the resources that I used and cited throughout the text. Many of my notes came from these resources as well, and those are additionally cited throughout the notes section in my slides. The last part of this presentation is a little tip that I picked up from having so many virtual professional development sessions. I have noticed that a couple of the presenters have taken a little bit of a background from some of the authors and writers of the articles and websites used throughout people's presentations. So I discussed a lot about Amanda Morin, and she's up in the top left. She worked as a classroom teacher and is an early intervention specialist for 10 years, and she's the author of the Everything Parents Guide to Special Education. She has two of her own children who have learning disabilities. The one in the bottom right is Nancy Rappaport. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, is the director of school programs at Cambridge Health Alliance, and an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. So it's nice to get a little bit of a look at the people that you're reading their work. And it's nice to see for Amanda's little bio, it talks about her book that she has. So it's nice to be able to use someone's work, but then also take a look at the other works they've created as well. And that will be the end of my presentation for EDH 501. I really enjoyed being able to put this together, and I really enjoyed getting to use my past professional development experiences, especially during COVID time, to inspire me to create this so that other educators will be able to use this PowerPoint presentation and the audio that goes along with it to share in a setting where teachers can be at home but still be receiving the same professional development as others. Thank you so much for listening.